Barbara.
I'm Cheryl.
And I'm Naima. We're three Black moms. Have you been to the motherland? Well, many of us who like to every now and then wear African garb realize that sometimes all we have to do is just change our clothing and it can be assumed by people that we must be from Africa. And that's not a bad thing. I mean, it's good to feel that you are in touch with your roots. We know that in February in the United States, we get a chance to review our history. And I never did understand why in the coldest month of the year, people would want to do African dance barefoot and wear these little garments that are meant for tropical weather. But, you know, that's our African heritage. But I think it is important for us to connect our children with a motherland, because especially if they have been involved with multicultural communities, if they have friends who have parents who perhaps are from another continent, or even if they have discussions and people talk about their heritage, they're going to feel something's missing if the only thing they can go back to is slavery. And so it's important for us to give them a wider point of view in terms of a heritage that is not something connected to a negative experience here in America. It's important for us to give them a vision of who they are that's beyond the slave experience, something that they can feel some pride about, and also maybe think in terms of going home one day. My daughter spoke about wanting to get that DNA test, which I think would be good for our family because it would let us know where we're from, particularly on the continent. But I think it's also important for us to have some knowledge. I remember going to a school one time, we were doing a presentation at a school, and one of the teachers said, "Can you teach me African language?" And I said, "Which language?" She said, "African." I said, "Which African language? There are many languages on the continent of Africa." And she was like, "Oh, really?" And I was surprised because this was a school teacher, and my assumption was that everybody knew that there are like 53 countries in Africa and hundreds of languages. But unfortunately, we don't know as much as we should know. So how do we introduce African culture to our children in a way that gives them a sense of pride and a connectedness to some roots? So what do you think?
Well, the first African that I ever met was when I was in 5th grade. We had a special speaker. He was from Kenya. Us being little ignorant 5th graders did not really know what to expect. I don't even remember what kind of questions we asked him. First of all, we were surprised because he did not look like any of the tribal pictures from any of the Tarzan movies that we saw. And so we were almost questioning if he really was from an African country. Cheryl, you were going to say something.
Yeah, it's funny. I'll jump on that because I remember the same experience, and someone came from the motherland, and he had a very thick accent. And of course, us being ignorant little children, people were so busy making fun that they missed out on this golden opportunity. And yet, so we have called ourselves African Americans because we don't know where we're from on the motherland. And I'm surprised how many people think that Africa is a country and not a continent. M- There are way too many people who don't know that there are 53 countries in the continent of Africa. And by the way, I did buy one of those 23andMe, and eventually I'm going to get around to spitting in the tube, and I'll let you all know where we're from.
Yeah.
uh, because Sarah's dying to know. But we are the only people who really can't say unless we know where we came from. Because my husband can trace his roots. He's I think he's third generation American, where we're like eighth or ninth.
Mhm.
So my daughter knows that she's Irish and African American, but she doesn't know what part of Africa her mother's people came from. And her mother's people may not have come from, because her mother's people had a father who may have come from a different place than her mother. So there's a lot of that we still don't know. But this is the thing that's funny, and the reason why we're all wearing our headgear is because I wanted to also talk about, are we appropriating African culture if we're African Americans? And I have worn my head wrap. I've worn it to church because I always have things that actually match, because I'm amazingly stylish when I want to be. But I also did it because last year when we went to New York, and we went on the train, I wanted to see if I was going to be treated differently. If I were going to be treated differently because I looked as if I were Ilhan Omar or some other woman who might be Muslim. And it was kind of a social experiment. I can't say that I wasn't treated any differently, but we don't know when we see people who wrap our hair, if it's because of our religion or because of our culture or what. I like the way it looks. And I like the idea that if I do my hair up and I set it and I have all the pins in it, if I throw a head wrap on, everybody thinks I'm stylish, and I'm just setting my hair from getting it washed. But I also just like the way I look as a person of color. And I want to celebrate that. And I think in the shortest, coldest month of the year, we take what we can get and we celebrate ourselves.
I remember in high school, back at Fanger, at the senior talent show, 6 very beautiful, brave Black women did an African dance. It was so enthralling. It was so demonstrative with the way the expressions, the drum beat, just everything was just glorious. It just made such an impression on us. And I remember also when I was visiting Lavinia in China during the that
The World's Fair, right?
the World's Fair, yeah, and got a chance to meet a number of Africans who were there representing. There were different African countries that were there. I got in a conversation with a young man, and he said, "Oh, you're American. You are not from the motherland." I was laughing because obviously my speech gave it away, but he was really friendly.
We can't pass. We can't.
Yeah, and they had really great coffee that I brought home. Eric actually had an opportunity. He went to Gambia, I think that's where he was. Now I have to go back and ask him. But because he brought me back this beautiful African robe, they said, make sure you bring your wife next time. He was there. They were starting a Christian ministry there. They had all collaborated with this one university. And he had a chance to meet a lot of people, try some different foods. And my husband is real squeamish about eating different stuff. So he would say, don't tell me what it is. This is really good. But if you tell me what it is, like if it's alligator, I ain't eating that. So it was like he was really funny. He's like that about everything. But I have to say, the African experience, from all the people that I know who have been there, they have enjoyed their time there. One friend of mine looks at Congo as her home. Because they were missionaries there for 40 years, and she would prefer, she doesn't want to be there during big unrest, but she would prefer living there than in the United States. And then Lavinia's best friend, she's African, but she grew up in the UK. So
Well,
you just have
African,
people that are from everywhere. Yeah.
Well, I've been to Liberia. When I went there, I think, was it 1984, I think, for the World Conference of Mayors. And it was held in Liberia. And it wasn't too long after the coup, they had a military takeover. So that was kind of an interesting experience because, they wouldn't allow you to take photographs out in certain public places. And you saw people with machine guns on the street. So that was a little unsettling. But in terms of going back into the countryside where we met the people, they were very welcoming. You know, they gave us these African robes and the whole thing, and I really enjoyed it. I happened to go with the African Hebrew Israelite community here in America. They assisted me in going on that trip with them because we were doing some business things together, and it was an eye-opening experience. But I did see some things in terms of great disparity of wealth, and I'm sure they had that here, but there it was like, you know, a mansion right here, and then down the street a shack, and I'm like, wow, you know. Here there's a disparity between the wealth and the wealthy and the impoverished, but it's not so close together. So that was
except in Washington D.C. where
in Washington D.C.
down the street from the White House.
Yeah, that is true. But I had a lot of, I guess, an African experience because of the school that I chose to have my daughter attend, which was the Betty Shabazz International Charter School, which had like an African-centered curriculum where they really emphasized a lot of African culture, and they kind of mixed together a lot of different things. You know, some of the words and terms we used were Swahili. You know, some were Zulu. You know, some were Yoruba. But it's okay. I mean, you got a little bit of flavor of each thing, and they did a lot of African dance, drumming, and that sort of thing. And I remember, of course, you remember Zakia's 8th grade graduation. And I mean, very lively, a lot of dancing, drumming. Matter of fact, I don't know if it was Eric or Sean, but one of them said, you know, compared to the graduations I've been to, those graduations are more like a funeral compared to this. This is like major celebration. But
I remember Sarah going down and dancing down there.
Yes. So it was.
She was maybe what, 4 or something like that? Or maybe she was a little older.
Yeah, just to let because the kid would have been about like 12, 13.
Yeah. So you know, it's interesting that you mentioned Liberia. One of my former pastors was from Liberia. And she actually was there. She knew like a lot of those people. She had been like a government person. And then when the coup came, she actually had to get her 5 kids out of there.
Oh, yeah.
And it was interesting because she told me something about Liberia that I didn't know. You know, Liberia was started by
immigrants from America.
They were former slaves.
Right. And
what they did when they came over, because Americanized. They came over and they built mansions and plantations, and they tried to enslave the native people, which is where the coup came from.
Right. That was it.
So we also have to realize that when we have trauma is repeated. That is not dealt with is repeated. So they turned around and tried to do to the native, the indigenous, you know, people, what had been done to them, because that's what they knew. So it was interesting that I had never known that.
Oh yeah.
And until she talked to me about this, and she's an amazing woman, and she's pastor now at a church in Framingham, I believe. But
yeah, there's
I learned a lot about that. And it's funny because we grew up, the 3 of us, we grew up at a time when what we saw of Africa was Tarzan, who, as raised by apes, was apparently more civilized than the people who were there. That the jungles of Africa, and I actually had to tell someone very recently that there are no jungles in Africa. There are rainforests. There are no jungles. And someone asked me, because apparently their Google, this was on Instagram, so
they don't know what a jungle is. That's probably one
thing.
The
difference was, you know, and I said, well, you know, you can Google this, but rainforest and vegetation is over, jungles and vegetation is under. So that's the short answer.
But yeah, you know, I had a experience when I was in college. We had an Ethiopian prince who was a student one year there, and and I have I wrote a little section about it in the upcoming Growing Up Charles book. And actually, there was a coup that took place while he was a student with me at Bradley. And it was a 50, 60 member bloodbath. They called it Black Saturday. His entire family, first they were under house arrest and then they were executed. And that was very traumatic. And of course, us ignorant students at Bradley, we didn't even know how to handle that. I don't even know if there was any protests on behalf of his country, if there was a lot of people coming to console him. He wasn't allowed to go back home. Wow. This was just, we were just removed, and yes. We just did not know how to react.
We were busy being Negroes.
Yeah.
We were busy being Negroes.
We didn't have a global.
We didn't connect with our motherland yet. And we still haven't in a lot of ways. And we should.
So when would you say your point of view changed from the Tarzan brainwashing to really understanding that it was brainwashing and knowing some basic facts like there are 53 countries in Africa and in many languages? When did that realization come to you? Was it a class? Was it in college? When did the light come on in your head and you learn those things?
I think for me it was when I met some actual Africans. When I did meet some actual Africans who were the ones that I have met, especially since moving here in Florida. They are immigrants. They've come here. Some of them are just here to learn a skill, take it back home to their country, their people, their family. Some of them are students. Some of them are immigrants who intend to live here. And that has been the most recent thing. But even before living here and actually meeting Africans in the workplace. Now, I will say this. Once you have, and I've never visited any African country, so my opinion may change later, but what I have learned from other Americans who've visited Africa, they say you come back recognizing how American you are. It's okay to go and visit the motherland and really try and have some kind of kinship and fellowship, kind of like Alex Haley, who went back and found, you know, his relatives from doing roots and the whole thing. But what I heard from another friend of mine, he said when he went, and I forgot which country he said he visited, but he said the people there, they were mean to him. They didn't want him taking any pictures. He said he was so glad to come back to the United States. Now, I don't know, maybe he gave off a bad vibe.
Depends on the country too. You know,
why would you want to take pictures of somebody else without their permission also? Now, I'll tell you the answer to your question first. I have to shout out Mrs. Barry. She was my 8th grade teacher. They ended up firing her actually. And we did a whole show on African history with African dance, with the script, with everything. And she taught us about who we were and the pride that we had and all the things that had been invented by our people before Neanderthals crawled out of their caves. So I grew up with this sense of pride through her, through other teachers that I had, Mrs. Corley. You know, remember Mrs. Corley? There were we had, and this is shows you the
Corley, Mrs. Hargrave.
You know, I don't remember if I had Miss Hargrave.
I had Mrs. Hargrave for 4th grade.
But this is the thing, is that when you grow up with Black teachers who can give you that sense of purpose and that sense of self and that awareness and that pride, it changes how you look at your motherland. Now, I want to speak to someone going over to Africa and taking pictures. I like for some people to look at an Instagram. It's called No White Saviors. And you see where people go over and they either, you know, want to, you know, colonize or maybe Christianize, prophesy or whatever going to do to these people. and they don't have the same respect for their culture and their country that they would somewhere else. Americans are great for wanting to go in and do what they call helping people. I think there's a word for it where they, this vacation, where they're helping out and they want to take pictures of all the cute little black kids. And
Very exploitive.
It's very exploitive.
And that's probably why people were not friendly.
I wouldn't want anyone taking pictures of my baby without my permission.
Oh.
And they do.
Yeah, this person though, this was a black photographer friend of mine.
But everything is about how you do things, because there is a respect level that's missing. Sometimes we don't ask permission for things, we don't explain what we're doing. And sometimes it's just an arrogance that people feel it. And Americans tend to be very arrogant because we always are believing that other people's culture is inferior. And if they sense that from your friend, that's probably why he got the response that he got.
I mean, it's like when you go to a powwow or another indigenous nations celebrations, and you don't go and start taking pictures without permission.
Asking, what's the protocol?
You have to ask them, because maybe if I have my baby strapped to me, I don't want you taking my picture. If I have my hair like this or wrapped up, maybe I don't want you to take my picture. I'm not, it's just like when and Barbara, you had this happen, and Naima, you had this happen. You go over to Asia and people want to take your picture, but
they always ask.
They did ask because it would have been offensive if they had not.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's the thing, is that when we embrace our culture, we also have to remember that we have to embrace who these people are, who our people are, and remember that we wouldn't want someone else to treat us that way.
Right.
And that's why we are more American than African, and we need to understand that.
Yeah, there are definitely different cultural things. I've experienced that, even being part of an international Muslim community, and I have a lot of friends that are from various African countries, a lot of friends who visited African countries that are African American, and some that have tried to even intermarry, and there are such major cultural differences. Who you are is not the color of your skin, it's how you grew up, it's the memories you have, it's your sense of humor based on shared memories, and you can't translate that to a skin color. So yeah, you might have common ancestry, but what you lived in your life as an American is not the same as what you're going to live in your life as a Ghanaian or a Nigerian or an Ethiopian. So you have to know these things. If you're going to marry somebody and thinking, oh, I'm going to get back to my roots, you have to understand that's a whole different culture, and you have to really talk about things, what things are appropriate, what's not appropriate, what's good manners, what's bad manners, how do you say certain things. It's a whole host of things you wouldn't even have to think about if you were marrying somebody that was from this country, because there is a big cultural difference regardless of what country you come from. It's how you grew up, and we tend to look at what's different.
You come from a different state here, even if you come from a different
East Coast, West Coast.
Here,
boy, that is the truth.
Yeah, if you come from the South, or if you come from the North, if you come from the East or the West or the Midwest, there's all kinds of different
culture right inside the same country.
Right.
So I had a lot of friends who had to kind of learn the hard way that there are cultural differences, even though there may be a common ancestry, and you really have to discuss those things. And you can't have the typical American attitude of our way is better, or we're superior, or we're more civilized. That is such a turnoff. And unfortunately, it's learned. It's even in subtle ways, the way multicultural education is presented, it's always kind of a slant to it, where you learn to sort of look down on people who do things differently. Even if somebody builds their home out of grass and mud, why do you think that's bad? If it's ecologically in harmony with the environment, why would you assume that's of lesser value than a concrete home? But it's the way we've been taught to think. So it's a lot of things that have to be undone when you even visit someplace, so that you're not offended.
Well, and then when you're going to visit, I know for Eric, when he went overseas, they gave him, before he left, it's almost like a training. They give you a pamphlet of the customs of that country, and you are taught it's not good or bad, just different. And if you can just absorb that, then you don't go in with some kind of judgmental attitude about the way things are done, the way people say things. You are recognizing that there is going to be a cultural shift. That shift does not mean bad. It just means different. Yeah. I had a close friend of ours, Dr. John Perkins, who talked about the exploitation of certain people. He said, even when you're bringing the gospel is not your culture or your ethnicity. You don't go to some country and say, okay, in order to receive Jesus, you have to wear shoes. No, that ain't
it. Well, you know, there's a whole lot of things that Americans tend to do that they don't realize is probably very offensive. And one of them has to do with the perception that certain clothing or lack of clothing is somehow lesser civilized or whatever the case may be. Even as we talk about, you know, the mothers with the baby strapped to them, you know, now that we're knowing that that is a much healthier way to carry your child, even better than a stroller, because they're constantly feeling your body warmth. But there were times when things like that, or as you say, walking barefoot. Well, now there's a big thing. They call it earthing, you know, walking barefoot. But people are doing it all the time. So the things that we had been taught to make fun of, now we're seeing the health benefits, the emotional benefits, and all of those things. So,
and somebody is making money off of those things that people are doing. They are financially capitalizing on something that we're naturally
doing all the time. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, we've got to go. It's about that time. So we want to ask you, what things would you like to learn about if you were going to consider returning to the motherland? What do you want to know about your ancestry? And how will you teach that to your children so that they have a healthy respect from where they came? How will you do that? Leave your comments and make sure you like and subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on our Facebook page, 3 Black Moms.
You know, I also want to put in a plug for Raising Proud Black Children by the Sankofa Club that covers those subjects regularly, and especially they have ongoing events this month for Black History Month. Very informative lectures, speakers, people from Africa, people from the United States.
How do they get to that? How do they find that?
You would just go to Raising Proud Black Children by the Sankofa Club. Right. Just type that in online.
All right. Well, hey, follow up and expose your children so that they can get a healthy view of who they are. I'm Naima.
I'm Cheryl.
I'm Barbara. We are 3 Black Moms.